The streets are still dark when the knock comes. Not a knock, but a pounding, iron against wood, echoing like the toll of a funeral bell. A door crashes open. Heavy boots scrape across the stones. Somewhere, a child begins to cry, their voice sharp and desperate, but quickly drowned out by the sound of armored men filling a narrow hallway. A woman is pulled from her bed before she can even gather her breath. Her nightclothes cling to her skin, damp with fear, as cold hands bind her wrists in rough rope. She doesn't scream, she knows it will only feed them, but the silence that escapes her lips feels heavier than any cry. A silence thick enough to choke. Dragged into the street, she stumbles barefoot across the cobblestones, the bite of each stone cutting into her flesh. Neighbors peer from shuttered windows, faces pale in candlelight, watching but not daring to intervene. They've seen this before. They know that tonight's victim could just as easily have been them. Outside, a cart waits. Its wheels creak, its iron hinges groan, like a beast hungry to swallow another soul. She is pushed onto it, her dignity stripped away with the same ease as the bindings around her arms. The journey begins, not toward justice, but toward a chamber no sunlight has ever touched. The closer they draw to the Inquisition's prison, the thicker the air becomes. Smoke from torches burning resin, the faint sting of hot iron, and beneath it all, a sour scent of sweat and decay. The streets grow quieter here. Even the dogs refuse to bark. And then the sound. A door slams behind her with the weight of iron, echoing through endless corridors of stone. From somewhere deep inside, a muffled cry rises, half human, half animal, cut short as if swallowed by the walls themselves. She feels it in her chest, vibrating like a drumbeat, reminding her of where she is and what waits for her. In the chamber, the silence is worse. It clings to her skin like damp cloth. She hears only the drip of water from the ceiling, the shuffle of boots, the crackle of fire. But in the shadows, shapes begin to appear, shapes that glint, shapes with hooks and ropes and gears. At first they look like tools. But then she realizes the truth. They are not tools. They are weapons. Weapons designed not to kill, but to unmake. This is the place where faith turns into fire, where salvation is promised through suffering. And here stands the question she cannot escape. What did it mean when the Inquisition claimed to save your soul by destroying your body? Before we open the doors to these forgotten chambers, tell me where you're watching Cursed Chronicles from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. And if you want to walk deeper into the shadows of history with us, make sure to subscribe right now so you never miss the truths others tried to bury. The prison doors have closed, but her story has only just begun. For what she has entered is not chaos, not even madness, but something colder, something designed. This is not the fury of a mob, or the wrath of a single tyrant. This is machinery, oiled with law, powered by scripture, and sharpened by centuries of fear. In 1478, Ferdinand and Isabella created the Spanish Inquisition, cloaked in the language of faith. At first, it was said to purify the land, to guard Christianity against corruption. But very quickly, it became something else, a bureaucratic empire of terror. Behind the stone walls and black hoods lay a system as organized as any court, with records, rules, manuals of procedure, and men trained not in justice, but in the art of breaking souls. Every chain, every torch, every rope was accounted for. Every confession catalogued. Every scream recorded with a precision that made cruelty appear righteous. And within this carefully polished machine, women became the most fragile cogs to crush. Their voices counted for less, their defenses stripped before they even opened their mouths. Testimony from a woman was considered weak, unreliable, often dismissed unless a man repeated it. Accusations, however, carried weight, and they were sharpened into weapons against them. A widow with too much property. A mother accused of tainting her children with forbidden prayers. A midwife said to whisper charms during childbirth. A literate woman who read scripture in the wrong tongue. These were crimes not because they threatened God, but because they threatened the fragile order of men who claimed to speak for him. To the Inquisition, women were not only vulnerable, they were profitable. The very moment an accusation was whispered, her property was seized. Land, livestock, jewelry, even children's inheritance, all confiscated before guilt was ever proven. And so the tribunal had incentive to accuse, to condemn, to bleed wealth from the bodies they broke. This was not random cruelty. It was a ledger balanced in blood. The accusations were tailored to their sex. Witchcraft, tied to sexuality. Heresy, tied to the milk a mother gave her child. Adultery, spun into whispers of pacts with devils. Every natural act of womanhood could be twisted into evidence of corruption. And once the charge was spoken, guilt was assumed, because the Inquisition did not seek truth. It manufactured it. Torture was the factory floor, the body of the accused its raw material. Within this machinery, women learned quickly that silence was as dangerous as speech. To speak was to incriminate yourself. To remain silent was to invite the rope, the rack, the iron. The system thrived on this no-win trap, for it needed neither evidence nor witnesses, only confession. And confession would come, because every device in those chambers was designed not for death, but for surrender. This was the genius of their cruelty, not to kill swiftly, but to bend, to break, to humiliate. They told themselves they were physicians of the soul, purging sickness through agony. But the truth was plainer, darker. This was control. This was order enforced by the theater of fear. The woman dragged from her home at dawn is not just a victim of her own accusation. She is fuel for a machine that has no end. A machine that consumes bodies and property, that silences voices and erases names, that writes its victories in ledgers while its victims vanish into smoke. And as we step deeper into these chambers, remember this. The devices you are about to witness were not born of chaos. They were refined, calculated, documented. They were not accidents of cruelty, but instruments of a system that thrived on suffering. If you're learning something new already, a quick like helps more people discover stories like this on Cursed Chronicles, and don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. The chamber is lit by fire, shadows bending across the walls like twisted phantoms. At its center hangs the simplest of devices, and yet one of the most merciless. From the ceiling descends a rope threaded through an iron pulley. It looks almost innocent in its design, like something you might see in a stable or workshop. But here, beneath the eyes of robed inquisitors, it becomes a weapon as cruel as any blade. The woman is stripped down to a thin shift. Her hair is bound tightly, her arms forced behind her back until the shoulders strain against their sockets. Rough hemp bites into her wrists as they are lashed together, the fibers designed to cut, not to hold. The end of the rope is hooked to her bindings, and with a motion that seems too casual for its consequence, the torturer begins to turn the wheel. Her body rises into the air. At first, she hovers just inches from the ground, her breath quickening, her eyes darting to the iron faces around her. Then she is lifted higher, until her entire weight dangles from her bound wrists. The body was never meant to bear such a position. The shoulders tear forward, joints screaming, tendons stretching until the first audible pop echoes in the chamber. It is a sound that silences everything else. The pain is immediate and absolute. It radiates through her arms, down her spine, into her chest. Muscles convulse, lungs tighten, and still the wheel turns. Manuals written for inquisitors recorded such details, measuring human suffering with clinical detachment. They advised how many pulls the body could survive, how long before shoulders dislocated, how weight might be added to hasten the break. These were not improvisations. They were instructions, perfected across generations, ensuring that agony lasted but life endured, so confession could still be torn from the lips. Sometimes the torture escalated. Weights tied to the ankles, 10 pounds, 20, then 50, dragging the body downward as the rope above pulled upward, tearing shoulders from their sockets, compressing the spine, splitting the chest. In the most dreaded variation, the victim was hoisted high, then dropped, only to be stopped suddenly before her feet could touch the ground. The jolt ripped through bone and sinew, tearing arms from sockets, fracturing vertebrae, leaving the body shattered yet still alive. The purpose was never execution. Death was considered wasteful. The purpose was confession, and confession would come, for pain has a language older than faith. At first, the woman resists, clenching her jaw against the words they demand. But the body betrays the mind. The searing fire in her joints, the slow unmaking of her own flesh, forces her to gasp, to beg, to cry out. And in those cries, the inquisitors hear the music they crave, admission, accusation, guilt, even if fabricated under torment. The symbolism of this device was never lost. To dislocate the shoulders of a woman was to strip her of her ability to hold, to carry, to nurture. It was a calculated destruction of her role in life, mother, worker, healer. When she left that chamber, if she ever did, she would never again cradle a child, never again lift a basket, never again embrace without agony. Her very arms, symbols of strength and care, were turned into instruments of permanent weakness. Every confession obtained beneath this rope was written into the records with precision, as if agony itself were a form of evidence. But the truth of those confessions mattered little. Whether she admitted to heresy, to reading a book, to whispering a prayer in the wrong tongue, it was enough that she submitted, that her will was broken, that her body testified through suffering. This is how faith became fused with cruelty, how salvation was declared through screams. And this was only the beginning, for the rope and pulley was the threshold. Once crossed, there was no return, only deeper chambers, darker devices, and the endless refinement of pain. If you can already feel the chill of what this system demanded, a quick like and subscribe helps more people discover stories like this on Cursed Chronicles. The pulley still sways above her, the rope frayed with strands of blood and skin. But her torment is far from over. For when the Inquisitors decide that confession must be deepened, when names must be forced from her lips, she is dragged to the device that dominated the chamber with its sheer presence. The rack. It fills the room like a coffin stretched into eternity. A massive wooden frame, solid as a ship's keel, with rollers fixed at either end. Iron windlasses, polished by use, gleam faintly in the firelight. Leather straps wait to bind flesh to timber, cold and unyielding. To look at it is to feel the body already begin to stretch. They lay her upon it, fastening wrists and ankles, securing her chest and thighs so that no movement, no instinctive flinch, can save her from what is to come. Even her hair is tied back, the head locked in place. She is reduced to a specimen, her body prepared not for punishment, but for dismantling. At first the wheel turns slowly. A quarter turn, just enough to remove the slack of her body. She feels her muscles tighten, fibers straining like cords pulled taut. Another turn, and the ache deepens into something more, something that no breath can release. She trembles as the body begins to fight against itself. The Inquisitors call this preparation, the moment when the flesh realizes what awaits and the mind begins to fracture under its anticipation. Then the real work begins. With each measured turn, her frame elongates. Fingers slip from their sockets, wrists crack, elbows spread. The sound is not only heard, but felt, deep in the marrow, as though her own skeleton were splintering into dust. The spine stretches, vertebrae pulled apart, as if the very architecture of her humanity is being unbuilt. Legs jerk and twist as hips begin to separate, knees bend against their nature, ankles groan until they no longer hold. The chamber itself becomes an orchestra of breaking. The wet rip of muscle, the sharp crack of cartilage, the steady creak of wood under the pressure of human agony. Every sound is amplified by stone walls, carrying down corridors to the ears of those still waiting in their cells. It is not only torture of one body, it is instruction to all who listen. Between turns, questioning resumes. The Inquisitors lean close, demanding names. Who else read forbidden words? Who gathered in secret? Who questioned the authority of men and the laws of God? The wheel does not stop until words spill out. And so they do. Not because they are true, but because the pain makes truth irrelevant. A woman will name her sister, her neighbor, her friend, anyone, if only the wheel will turn backward and grant her body a single moment of reprieve. This was the true purpose of the rack. Not only to extract confessions, but to multiply the accused. Each broken body became a seed of accusation, scattering suspicion across entire communities. A single woman stretched upon the frame might condemn 10 more. And so the machine of fear expanded, link by link, confession by confession, all forged upon the timber of the rack. When at last she is unbound, she is no longer the same being who entered. She is taller now, grotesquely lengthened by inches, but her stature is a ruin. Muscles torn, joints shattered, bones unseated. She cannot walk without collapsing, cannot lift her arms, cannot even embrace another soul without pain searing through her like fire. Yet she is still alive. Alive enough to be paraded, humiliated, made to repeat her confession before crowds who cannot see the hidden destruction that rides beneath her skin. The rack did not kill. It transformed. It turned flesh into testimony, agony into evidence. And long after the chamber emptied, the memory of its creak and crack remained, etched into bone, into mind, into the silence that followed each scream. If you can feel how methodical this cruelty was, how it turned pain into a weapon of control, tell us where you are watching from in the comments section, and subscribe to Cursed Chronicles ensures these stories of shadow and suffering are never lost to silence. The body torn upon the rack is carried away, but the Inquisitors are not finished. for there were torments designed not just to break flesh, but to unmake womanhood itself. Devices created with a singular perverse intent, to strike at the very symbols of femininity, to brand women as corrupted in body as they were accused of being in spirit. One such instrument was the iron spider. Its claws, forged of blackened steel, were heated in braziers until they glowed red, filling the chamber with the acrid scent of scorched iron. The victim would be bound upon a table, her shift torn from her chest as the inquisitors watched in silence. The heated claws were pressed to her breasts, not to kill, but to scar, to mutilate, to strip away the part of her body that nourished life. The act was not only pain, it was symbolism. In their eyes, if a woman nursed heresy, her breasts must be torn, burned, erased. Survivors often carried those scars for life, unable to feed children, rejected by husbands, stripped of identity in a society that defined them by motherhood. The iron spider was not simply torture. It was annihilation of role, a rewriting of the body into an eternal mark of guilt. Another horror was the pear of anguish. At first glance, it appeared harmless, an iron fruit with smooth sides. But within its metal shell were 4 blades, controlled by a screw. Inserted into the mouth, or worse, the body of a woman accused of fornication with devils, the pear was then expanded. Slowly, deliberately. The mouth tore at the corners, teeth cracked, the jaw dislocated. Inside the body, it did worse, shredding tissue, destroying the womb, ensuring that the victim would never again bear children. And yet when displayed before the crowd, her injuries were invisible, hidden inside. To the world she looked intact. Only she carried the ruin, inside her mouth, inside her flesh, inside her very being. Such devices were designed for women because women were seen as doubly dangerous, capable not only of corrupting faith, but of corrupting life itself. Their bodies were made to be symbols. Their punishments, a theater of gendered violence. Each scream was meant to remind every other woman what awaited if she dared to read, to speak, to think, to resist. The cruelty lay not only in the suffering inflicted, but in its aftermath. These were wounds that never healed. A woman left the chamber unable to nurse, unable to conceive, unable to share her body with love again. Her pain lingered long after the flames of the braziers died, a permanent reminder that the Inquisition had power not just over her faith, but over her very ability to exist as a woman. And so the machinery of fear became more than political control. It was personal. It was intimate. It was carved into flesh and memory with iron heated to white fire. If this part of history leaves you shaken, let me know with a like. It helps Cursed Chronicles carry these buried truths further, so more voices can witness what was meant to be erased. The chamber holds another device, one that at first glance resembles a throne. But this seat is no symbol of authority. It is an altar of pain, a chair forged not for comfort, but for endless torment. The judgment chair. It stands in the center of the room, bristling with iron spikes across every surface. Hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000, covering the seat, the back, the armrests, the footrests. They glint in the torchlight, sharp enough to pierce skin, blunt enough not to kill outright. The victim is stripped bare and lowered slowly, carefully, onto this throne of agony. The first touch draws hundreds of punctures at once. The body instinctively shifts, searching for relief, but every movement only drives the spikes deeper. Iron bands clamp around wrists and ankles, others lock across the chest and thighs. There is no escape, no shifting, no reprieve. She is fixed to her torment. The design was deliberate. The spikes were spaced so no weight could be evenly spread, forcing certain points of the body to carry unbearable pressure. As minutes pass, the wounds swell, pressing harder against the spikes. Blood seeps slowly, never enough to bring death, always enough to deepen the pain. Hours later, cramps seize her limbs, the body begging to move, to stretch, to find relief. But every twitch, every instinctive jerk, turns agony sharper. And the cruelty does not stop there. Beneath the chair, braziers are lit. Flames lick the iron until the spikes begin to glow with heat. What was once piercing cold steel becomes a field of burning needles. The flesh cooks where it touches. Smoke rises, thick and acrid, carrying the stench of burning skin through the chamber. The heat cauterizes wounds even as it creates them, preventing blood loss, ensuring the victim remains alive to endure more. Some chairs were built with adjustments, backs that could tilt, angles that shifted pressure to new places when one area grew numb. The torturers understood that the body could sometimes dull pain over time, and so they devised ways to keep the agony fresh, unrelenting. Even sitting, that most natural human act, became a sentence of unending punishment. This was the genius of the Inquisition, to take the ordinary rope, pulley, chair, and twist it into instruments of despair, to turn the very posture of rest into a crucible. And for women bound to the judgment chair, the symbolism was brutal. A seat of thorns for those accused of moral corruption, a false throne for those condemned as queens of sin. When she was finally removed, if she survived, her body bore hundreds of wounds, many infected, many permanent. She might never walk without pain, never sit without feeling phantom spikes pressing into her flesh. The chair left scars that time could not erase. What strikes the heart is not just the pain itself, but the patience of it. This was not an execution. This was endurance, forced day into night, night into day, until the will broke and the confession spilled forth. The device did not seek truth. It sought surrender. If you've stayed with me through this descent, you know how far cruelty can go when wrapped in ritual. If this part shocked you, let me know with a like. It truly helps Cursed Chronicles bring these hidden truths to light and tell us where you're watching from. The body, punctured and burned, is dragged from the chair, but the Inquisitors are never finished. For in their arsenal lay a torment more insidious than iron or flame, a torture that left no visible scars, yet carved itself into memory so deeply that survivors could never again look upon water without trembling. They called it the toca, the water torture. The victim is bound to a board tilted downward, her head lower than her feet, so that blood rushes cruelly toward her skull. This position alone disorients, pressure building in her temples until the world swims. Her mouth is forced open with an iron gag, the same device sometimes used in other torments, prying her jaw until it aches. Then a coarse cloth is laid over her face, covering nose and mouth, turning her very breath into an impossible task. At first, only a trickle of water is poured. It soaks into the cloth, clinging, sealing, pressing down until it fuses with skin. Then the steady flow begins. The water invades, seeping into nostrils, mouth, throat. She tries to draw air, but inhales only liquid. Every instinct screams to breathe, but each attempt tightens the drowning grip of the cloth. Her body convulses against the straps, back arching, limbs straining, muscles jerking with the primal terror of suffocation. The Inquisition measured this agony with precision. Jars of water, 6, 8, 12, were prescribed in their manuals, each session calibrated like a physician's dose. Between pours, the cloth was wrung out, the victim left gasping, retching, coughing, while the Inquisitors leaned close to demand confessions. And then the water would return, each wave renewing the drowning, each jar heavier than the last. There is a cruelty unique to this torment, its invisibility. When the woman is finally released, her body bears no broken bones, no burns, no scars. To the crowd, she might appear untouched. But within, the destruction lingers. The lungs inflamed, the sinuses torn raw, the throat swollen, the heart weakened by the repeated panic of near death. Survivors often carried the memory for life, unable to wash their faces, unable to drink without choking, every drop of water a reminder of suffocation. Worse still was its use upon pregnant women. Their convulsions often ended in miscarriage, and yet the same tribunal that caused the loss accused them of murder, claiming they had destroyed their own children to hide their heresy. Grief itself was twisted into guilt, another weapon in the machinery of fear. The toca revealed the Inquisition's most chilling truth, that cruelty did not need blades or fire to break the human spirit. It could be done with the very element of life. With water, the gift of baptism turned into the instrument of despair. If you are learning something new in these shadows of history, a quick like helps more people discover stories like this on Cursed Chronicles and ensures these voices are not drowned out again. The chamber fades, but the torment does not end within walls of stone. For the Inquisition understood that pain in secret was only half its power. The other half lay in spectacle, in the theater of fire and humiliation, in the grand procession known as the auto da fe. At dawn, the prisoners were told their sentences. Some would face years in prison, others exile, and a few, the unlucky, the unrepentant, the condemned, would be handed to the secular arm, the polite phrase for death by burning. The night before, priests visited their cells, urging confession, offering mercy in the form of strangulation before the flames. Yet for those who refused to yield, only fire awaited. The condemned were dressed in garments designed for shame, not protection. The San Benito, a coarse tunic painted with flames or demons, announced their fate to all who saw. Upon their heads, a carroza, a pointed cap daubed with symbols of damnation. They were no longer individuals, no longer mothers, daughters, or wives. They had been transformed into living symbols of heresy, walking lessons for the crowd. The streets filled as they were paraded through town. Some hobbled on broken limbs, others were carried in carts, their bodies too mangled from torture to walk. Crowds gathered, children upon shoulders, merchants at stalls, neighbors who dared not look away. Stones were thrown, insults shouted, all sanctified by priests who declared violence against heretics a holy act. Each prisoner's humiliation became a feast for the eyes, a spectacle to remind every watcher of the price of resistance. The plaza awaited them, a vast stage set with wooden scaffolds. At its center rose the stakes, heavy posts surrounded by stacked timber, built not to blaze quickly, but to smolder and smoke, prolonging the agony. Before the burning came the sermons. Hours of sermons. Priests thundered about the dangers of heresy, the mercy of the church, the justice of the punishments. Meanwhile, the condemned stood exposed, weakened by weeks or months of torment, forced to listen as their confessions, often written under torture, were read aloud, embroidered with accusations of devil worship or obscene sins that had never been theirs. For some, this was the breaking point. At the edge of death, they confessed anything, hoping for the mercy of strangulation before the fire. For others, silence remained their last act of defiance, their refusal to admit guilt of final rebellion. The crowd responded as one body, sometimes roaring for blood, sometimes hushed with uneasy pity. But pity was dangerous, for to sympathize with a heretic was to risk suspicion yourself. Then came the final walk. Chains rattled as they were bound to the stake, the sambenito and carroza marking them like banners. The pyres were lit with green wood, chosen to burn slow, producing smoke before flame, choking the lungs before searing the skin. Some cried out in prayer, others screamed until their voices failed, their words rising above the crowd and echoing across the city. And some, it was said, whispered only silence, their defiance written in the way they met the fire. The auto da fe was not merely punishment. It was theater. It was a ritual of fear, binding the community together in a shared vision of judgment. Children were brought to see, so they would never forget. Merchants, nobles, peasants, all gathered as witnesses, their own loyalty reinforced by the flames consuming another. For the Inquisition knew that a death unseen loses its power, but a death staged, prolonged, and sanctified, that becomes eternal. What mattered most was not the victim's end, but the memory seared into the minds of thousands. A woman screaming as smoke curled around her body, a garment of painted flames marking her as condemned, a crowd chanting prayers while her flesh blackened. These images lingered, spreading fear long after the ashes cooled. What do you think was worse, the secret chamber of torture or the public theater of the stake? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Cursed Chronicles so you never miss the stories that remind us how far human cruelty has reached in the name of power. Not every woman taken by the Inquisition was burned at the stake. Some survived. But survival was not freedom. It was a life reshaped by pain, poverty, and shame. Those who emerged from the dungeons carried bodies that would never heal. Shoulders torn from the rope, and pulley never set right again. Joints stretched and ruined by the rack, leaving them unable to lift a pot or hold a child. Scars from the iron spider branded their chests, reminders of a womanhood mutilated. Many lived with infections that festered until death, or with phantom pain that never ceased. Survivors could not work as they once had, could not tend homes, could not provide for children. Their broken bodies became their own prisons. The Inquisition's reach extended beyond the body. Property confiscated at the moment of accusation was rarely returned. A woman released found herself destitute, her wealth absorbed into the coffers of the tribunal, her children stripped of inheritance. The stigma of accusation was permanent. In her parish, the garment she had worn for penance, the sambenito, was displayed for all to see, a cloth reminder nailed to church walls that marked her as a heretic long after her sentence had ended. No employer, no suitor, no neighbor looked at her without suspicion. Survival became a new kind of exile. Families bore the weight as well. Husbands abandoned wives whose bodies were ruined. Children grew up ashamed, whispered about as the sons and daughters of heretics. Communities shunned survivors, fearing guilt might be contagious, fearing that sympathy itself might be noticed by the wrong eyes. Some women turned to begging in the same streets where they had once walked as merchants or wives of status. Others turned to the only means of survival left, selling their bodies, a bitter irony for those condemned as corrupt in the first place. And yet, within this ruin, there was resilience. Some survivors found ways to preserve memory, even in silence. A prayer book with hidden notes written in margins, embroidered cloth carrying coded testimonies, stitches that told stories where words could not. Women whispered to each other at wells, teaching one another which inquisitors could be placated, which tortures could be endured, how to survive with the least destruction. Knowledge passed in fragments, forming secret networks of resistance that the Inquisition never fully extinguished. But still, the weight remained. To survive was to wake each day with a body that betrayed you, with neighbors who looked upon you as cursed, with memories that could never be forgotten. Pain became not just an experience, but an identity. This was the aftermath, a world where survival was as cruel as death, where the chamber's reach followed women long after the doors had closed. If hearing about the resilience hidden in these shadows moves you, take a moment to subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. By doing so, you help ensure that these stories, carried in whispers and scars, are not lost again to silence. The Inquisition may have ended on paper in 1834, but its echoes did not vanish with the closing of its prisons. The patterns it carved into history, the silencing of women, the use of the body as battlefield, the corruption of justice into theater, still resound in the world we inhabit. The methods live on, reshaped but recognizable. In the 20th century, secret police in Argentina and Chile tortured women in ways disturbingly similar to the manuals of the Inquisition, binding them, stretching them, violating them, demanding confessions not for truth but for power. Nazi doctors in their laboratories carried forward the same cold logic. Suffering documented as experiment, agony disguised as medicine. In parts of Africa and Asia even today, women accused of witchcraft are paraded, beaten, mutilated, burned, just as their sisters were in Spain centuries ago. The devices may change, but the structure remains. Even in courts that claim to be modern, the echoes are clear. The Inquisition taught that a woman's word was worth less, that her body could be used against her, that her past could erase her credibility. These patterns still linger in trials of sexual violence, where the questions echo the old chambers. Were you pure? Were you truthful? Did you bring this upon yourself? The courtroom becomes a chamber of fear, and women stand before judges much as they once stood before inquisitors, guilty until broken. The destruction of women's knowledge also endures. Midwives, healers, literate wives, once branded as heretics for their independence, were erased, their traditions buried. In their place rose systems dominated by men, their authority cemented not by wisdom, but by the silencing of others. Even now, across cultures, women who claim spiritual visions or intellectual authority outside of sanctioned boundaries are branded dangerous. Their voices suppressed not by rope and rack, but by ridicule, censorship, and exile. And always there is the theater. The auto da fe, the public burning, survives in new forms. Not with wood and flame, but with spectacle, public shaming, digital mobs, campaigns of humiliation designed not just to punish one, but to terrify many. The plaza has become a screen, the crowd has become global, but the lesson is the same. Dissent will be burned, and all must watch. The Spanish Inquisition taught that torture could be made into bureaucracy, that cruelty could be wrapped in sanctity, that oppression could endure for centuries if given the right rituals. It is not simply history, it is a template, and the most haunting truth is this. The machinery of fear, once built, never entirely disappears. It waits in shadows, ready to be assembled again in any age where power hungers more for obedience than for justice. If you believe these echoes must be remembered, not forgotten, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. These stories are not merely of the past, they are warnings, etched in fire and blood, that speak still to the present. The flames of the stake consumed many, but not all voices were silenced. Across the centuries, fragments of testimony remain, whispers preserved in court records, notes hidden in margins of prayer books, words stitched into cloth. They tell us of women who endured, who refused to yield their minds even as their bodies were broken. One name drifts through the smoke, Maria, condemned for daring to read words men claimed she could not understand. Before her execution, she is said to have spoken quietly, almost to herself. I die for reading words that men feared I might understand. In that single sentence lies the essence of the Inquisition's terror. It was never only about heresy. It was about control. Control of knowledge, of bodies, of voices. To read, to question, to know. These became crimes worthy of fire. Her words, simple yet defiant, carried more power than all the sermons thundered by the inquisitors. For in them we hear not submission, but resistance. The refusal to let truth be chained. The refusal to allow fear to erase thought. And though her body was turned to ash, her voice survived, carried across centuries to us. This is the final cruelty and the final triumph of the story. Cruelty, because the Inquisition succeeded in destroying countless lives, branding women as heretics, witches, corruptors. Triumph, because it failed in its ultimate goal. It did not silence forever. The voices return, echoing through history, reminding us of what was endured, what was lost, and what must never be repeated. The torture devices of the Spanish Inquisition did more than break bones. They broke identities, tore families, erased knowledge. But they also revealed a truth about power, that it fears the mind, that it fears the word, that it fears the strength of those it tries hardest to silence. And so, even in ruin, there was defiance. Even in fire, there was memory. As you leave this chamber of shadows, remember that the machinery of fear thrives on forgetting. To speak these stories, to listen, to remember, is to weaken that power. Join me here on Cursed Chronicles, where we keep alive the voices that were meant to be erased. Subscribe now, so that together we can walk through the darkest corridors of history, not to glorify cruelty, but to ensure its lessons burn brighter than the flames that once consumed the innocent.